In this text, Paul has mentioned eye service and bond service. And those are two radically different ideas. To think about that today, I have been concentrating on with you the eye service, I got to. And the bond service, I get to. And it is a fact that there are times in life when some Christians have this got to mentality. And that kind of eye service, and in that case I might think eye service, because doing what my duty is that God, yes, says I've got to do, gets in my way of what I want to do. And we have to deal with that. But how am I going to move from got to get to? Well, that's what we talked about this morning, and how to change our focus. Well, tonight, obviously, we're going to look at it the other way. By and large, this is a group of people who are more get to than got to. We all know what the phrase, the Sunday night crowd, means. Those are the people, not that the Sunday morning crowd doesn't have a good attitude, but I know this. You're here tonight. You are a part of this experience. You are in this time, and by and large, your attitude is, we get to. Because, I don't know if it's just the idea of twice on a Sunday just sort of makes it extra difficult. If it's because of COVID, we got out of the habit. That's just one idea that sometimes people struggle with, which is, God expects so much out of me. And in looking at it from the perspective always of thinking about what we've got to do, sometimes leaves us wanting in the get to department. That's not you. But here's where you and I might be. We might get to the point where, over time, because of what happens in life, because of where we are, because of what's going on, all of the time, we are the get-to people that might, in fact, be tempted to be got-to people. Oh, man. I've been doing this and this and this and this. And now the church just announced one more thing. Oh, man. There's so many things going on. I just don't have time to do everything that's out there. Oh, no. I want to be a get-to person. But all of a sudden, I'm beginning to feel a little got to. I'm going to do a couple of things. Number one, give you one principle that I like to remind us about often. I believe the church, and I believe every Christian life, but everything about the church, and you can see it in our program of work, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of potential here of things to do and to be involved. And every church ought to have enough stuff going on that everybody can find something that they say, oh, that's me, I like that. But it should never be the case that every single person is expected to be involved in every single thing, because that's not what God means with His got tos. You see, I know that's true. Because if that's what God means, then God is telling me, Johnson, you got to make teddy bears and they will be ugly. And the kids won't want them. I know that because that's what I did. They let me try it. And after one bear, they said, you're finished. We don't want bears at the hospital that look like they have tumors. Okay. So I don't think that everybody's got to do everything. But sometimes because we are get-to people, we sort of think, okay, this is one more chance. And eventually we get tired. Eventually we face the temptation of, I'm just not sure I can do anymore. And that's when the got-tos start creeping in. Because you might say, but I've got to. Do you really? So the first thing is to let you know, no, you don't got to do everything. But you get to do so much. You pick and choose and we can do. But number two, let's think about some things that we can do mentally. When we start feeling ourselves heading into that got-to mentality, how can I stop it? Just out of curiosity, how many of you have been a child of God for 50 years or more? Look at that number. How many are 30 years or more? Keep your hands up, 50s. How about 10 years and more? You know what? That's a number of years. Over time, you might get tired. Over time, you might slip into the got-to phase. Here's the first thing I want you to do. I want you to remember what it was like. Do you remember the day that you obeyed the Lord? Do you remember coming out of the waters of baptism? I honestly don't know the day, the time. I know where, and I know how old I was. But here's what I do remember. There was something fresh and new. There was something going on in that first moment and in those first few years that I can remember, and you probably do too. Remember yourself this way, the way Paul said to the Philippians in chapter 1 and verse 6. He said, I am thankful for you that God has begun a great work in you. I want you to remember that when you became a child of God, He started working on you. He started working on us. And we're different people now. I dare say we're better people now. He started a great work in us. And He's still working. So when you're tempted to get into the got tos, just think, God's still working on me. I'm good. Just like He told the Philippians. Do you remember the time in your life when God might say about you what He did through Paul to the Thessalonians in chapter 1 of 1 Thessalonians in verse 3? I remember your work of faith, your labor of love, and your patient hope. At the end of chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians, Paul said there are three things left: faith, hope, love. These three. To the Thessalonians, he said, I remember your faith, your hope, your love. God has worked in you and me in those very same ways. Think back to the good stuff in those ways that He has done with you, and know that He's still doing it. Or how about 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 3? Paul said, I am so happy that your faith grows exceedingly. When you're tempted and you are punishing yourself, you're upset with yourself because of the got-tos are starting to creep in, remind yourself, isn't your faith stronger now than it's ever been? If you're a 10-year-old Christian, isn't your faith 10 years stronger? Aren't you stronger now in faith like the Thessalonians were? So you're okay. God's still working with you. Don't quit. Or maybe the text before us in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 5. I talked about it this morning, but I want you to notice it again. When Paul was writing to Timothy and he was appreciating him, I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you. He said it dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice. I know it's in you too. Whenever you are tempted to be upset with yourself because you're sort of dreading certain things, you're sort of burdened down with what appears to be so many expectations, just remember what it was like to have genuine faith, and you still do. You haven't lost it. We're get-to people. Our faith is still here. It's genuine. It's something that we've been working on our entire Christian lives. You're okay. Being tempted by the got-tos is common. But your faith is still strong. That's how God thinks of you. So, in the moments of those temptations, for instance, again, I'm not singling out people or ideas or anything's more important than another, but just to show you the kind of things that I'm talking about. You get a message on your phone. 15 meeting coming up. And you've had a tough week at work and you know what's coming. You go, oh man. That's the moment the got-tos start to tempt you. You don't want to feel that way. You don't have to. Because we're get-to people. And we're going to pick and we're going to do what we want and need to do and know that the get-to attitude is what we want. So how do I fight it when it comes to me? When the got to started to attack, what do? Well, here are some things that you can question to see if this is where you are. If you're not there, then you're good. But if you notice something in these questions that applies to you, and you can say, I'm going to stop it right here, then you can stop. You can halt the got to temptation. You can ask the question, am I turning back? Jesus said in Luke 9, verse 62, anyone who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is not fit for the kingdom of God. When the temptation to the got-to mentality comes, ask yourself, am I looking back to something that's better? Is that where my danger point is? Is that where I need to pay attention? Is that maybe a concern? If so, stop looking back. Look forward. But the looking back mentality could lead to got to. Paul said in Galatians chapter 1 and verse 6, I marvel that you are so soon turning away from the gospel to a different gospel. When the got-tos come, ask yourself, am I beginning to adopt a new teaching? A new understanding? Am I changing what I understand to be right? And if it's a change that needs to happen, then go with it. Because that keeps you as a get-to person. I get to study and learn and grow and change. But if you ask yourself that question and you begin to say, oh, wait a minute, I don't think this is right. I've been deceived by false teaching, then just stop. And the got-tos, they'll go away. Or how about Galatians 5:7? You did run well. Who stopped you? Any of you used to be runners and stopped? Me? What stops you from running? Well, when you start, yeah, right, Ken, that's exactly right. The knees said that's enough. You're right, I get it. In fact, the doctors will say that now. Walking's better. Maybe we should say, you did walk well. What stopped you? When the got-tos come, ask yourself, have I quit walking or running? Am I starting to sit down? Am I starting to stop? Am I starting to say, oh, I don't want to do this anymore? If so, just kick yourself, get up and move again. Or how about what Paul said to Timothy about Demas, who has forsaken him and has loved the present world? Maybe the temptation to got to do things that God wants is because at the moment the world has a hold of me. It did just a minute ago to me. But again, thankful for that wonderful invention of DVR. The golf tournament was on the last hole. The last hole. And I had to come in here. I got to be in here. I could have just sat right there till it was time for me to get up, just come running in. I had to fight it. Not really, because I watch it later. But you see the point? Sometimes the world gets hold of us. And when you start thinking that you're becoming a got-to person, just ask yourself, is that what's happening? Is that what's going on? Is it possible that in fact the world has hold of me and I don't want it to anymore? Or how about the Hebrews in chapter 10 and verse 38? If anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. There's not a single person who, as they get older in life or older as a Christian, keeps doing as much and as intensely as they always have. Because we just don't. Age stops it some. So when you feel yourself sort of backing out of things and you start getting upset with yourself because, hey, I get to do this and I'm choosing to back out. Are you really? Are you drawing back because of lack of faith, or you're not as dedicated? Or is it just the natural process? Don't beat yourself up. The got-tos are going to come and they're going to say, your attitude is not what it needs to be. So ask yourself, am I really drawing back from God? If not, you're a get-to person. Just keep going. Or how about what Peter said in 2 Peter 2 and in verse 20? Am I entangled in something again? You find yourself praying the same thing over and over and over. Do you find yourself disappointed with yourself? Because I don't want this anymore? And you wonder, is God really hearing me or not? Because I've said it so many times. Well, if that got-to mentality is coming from being entangled in something over here, then just check it out. Yeah, I don't know that I know we'll never conquer temptation. It's always going to be there. And there are things that some of us are going to struggle with more than others. But it doesn't mean that you're so entangled in it that you've given up. But if you are, then be honest. Because that entanglement will make the things of God seem like got-tos rather than get-tos. How about finally Revelation 2 and 4? John, writing to the church, said, Ephesus, you've left your first love. Have you? When you start feeling like you're digressing into an attitude that feels more like got to than get to, ask yourself, is it because I don't love God like I used to? Possible, right? Is my love less now than it was 10 years ago? If you've been in a relationship for a long time, you know that the intensity of it is different through the years. But I think it goes from shallow to deep. A real relationship, that's what it does. You need to ask yourself, if my attitude is such that I am tempted to think God is wanting me to do things and I don't want to do them. And I feel burdened by being a Christian. And you're tempted to have the got to mentality. Ask yourself, have you left your first love? And if there is a waning in your love for God, then be honest and say, yeah, and I'm going to get it back. But if you can honestly say, you know, I love the Lord more now than I ever have, then don't beat yourself up because you have been tempted by the got-tos. We're all going to get there. And we've all been there. There's not a person here who hasn't been tempted with the mentality of looking at God and saying, I got to. But once you get that away, it changes the look on everything. Because now I get to. I get to do this. Because the Lord provided it, and there's so much better stuff coming. Well, I hope that we're constantly working to be get-to people without beating ourselves up when got-to tempts us. But let us not underestimate that there are things that we've got to do. And one of those is you've got to accept Jesus. Without Him, you cannot be saved. And until you're immersed into Jesus Christ, you have not decided to take Him on and to be a child of God. And God will not honor that. You'll be lost. But when you're ready to say, I get to be a child of God. After all the stuff I've done, the places I've been, I get to be a child of God. When you're ready to do that, we're ready to help you. Or to pray for anybody in need while we stand and sing together.